So how bad has mental stress been on Black communities? It's not even going to try and justify it, but I'm going to give or measure it in any way, but I'm going to give some examples. Let's table the medical and educational and infrastructure stuff for a second, if it's even fair to do that, and focus on racist treatment. Namely, the Justice Department just found a pattern of discriminatory policing in the Minneapolis Police Department, saying it routinely engaged in a pattern of racist and abusive behavior that deprived people of their constitutional rights. More studies are on the way on other locations across the country, but this study was prompted by the murder of George Floyd 3 years ago. The report was drawn from reviews of thousands of hours of body camera recordings and documents, analysis of data on calls for service, stops, uses of force, and other officer activities from 2016 to 2022. So quite a volume of work. Investigators also interviewed some 2,000 community members, including family members of those killed by police and members of the department in all ranks. The findings: police engage in unconstitutional use of deadly force. Officers used 49% more, used force 49% more often during stops involving Black people. Merrick Garland singled out one account of an officer's body cam footage during his press conference. An officer who stopped a car carrying Somali American teens said he was proud of the 1993 U.S. military raid on Mogadishu, Somalia, depicted in the movie Black Hawk Down. And I quote, "When we killed a bunch of your folk, we didn't finish the job over there. If we had, you guys wouldn't be over here right now," end quote, the officer said. I can't wrap my head around being told that from a person of authority that has so much leverage over you in the moment. Is that too plain of a way of putting it?
I mean, but again, yeah, I think that it becomes normalized because the society as a whole is built to alienate you. So just another leg or another arm of that society, and reinforcing what you already suspect is true doesn't necessarily it's not like a watershed moment. You're not going to go back and say, oh my God, my world is now shocked and crumbling. It's more of like, well, it's another, what is it? It's another link in the chain. Essentially, the chain just gets longer. It gets heavier, but it's still the same chain. It's exactly what you'd expect. So yeah, that's about right.
In a different
mistrust
study
of authority in general is what we need to be talking about here. And I think that, you were talking about generational trauma. Another aspect about generational trauma is not just about what is told and passed down. There's a huge aspect that people are starting to study and psychologists are trying to unpack with regard to what is unconscious, like generational trauma. So it's like basically if something very traumatic happens to you, like let's say there's PTSD from having been in a war, in your actions and in terms of, they're actually saying it can change you on a genetic level, and you can pass on that genetic change to your children. So if you have an increased propensity at that point for anxiety, you can pass that along to your children, and they can pass that along. So you could start building in these limiting factors with regard to having to deal with like just high levels of anxiety in general. Plus, you're thrust into a society that is trying to actively alienate you. These things, so it's like it's almost not surprising that there is such a level of mistrust of the government, mistrust of institutions, and mistrust of authority figures. And authority figures include doctors, lawyers, police, even firefighters, because firefighters were not great at the turn of the century. There are many instances where they would roll up to Black neighborhoods and watch their houses burn, especially in the South. So I'm just saying it's at almost all levels of our society that you're dealing
it's
with.
in your DNA. I mean, it's like
Right,
in
and
your
that's what I'm
DNA
saying.
at that
And then
point.
at a certain point,
And I believe it. Like the whole epigenetic layer, that's part of what happens. You go through these life experiences, and your epigenetic layer expresses your genes differently, and it is how you survive in a sense. You're conditioning your body to behave a certain way to deal with your environmental stresses, and you do, at least the way that I understand it, you do pass an element of that on to the next generation. So I don't doubt that these could have that type of impact. I mean, stress is stress. And so if there's an element of that stress that can impact you, what, like biophysically or something like that, I have no doubt that your DNA couldn't be altered in some way.
Yeah, I mean, you laid down the knowledge, you laid down the scientific aspects to what I was basically alluding to. But yes, yeah, we are in agreement there. So
Wow.
carry on.